The Crimson Dawn commander Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the observation deck window of Aurora 7, watching the stars dance in the endless void of space. The research station hung silently at the edge of human territory, a beacon of scientific discovery in the darkness. Elena had spent 3 years studying alien artifacts and deep space phenomena, but nothing had prepared her for what she was seeing now. Commander? Dr. Marcus Chen's voice cracked through the intercom, thick with terror. You need to get to the lab immediately. We're detecting massive energy signatures approaching our position. Elena rushed through the corridors of the station, her boots echoing against the metal floors. The research facility housed 200 of humanity's brightest minds, all dedicated to pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. As she burst into the main laboratory, she found Dr. Chen staring at a holographic display that made her blood freeze. 12 ships materialized out of the darkness, each one resembling a massive organic tumor covered in pulsing veins. The vessels moved through space with an unnatural fluidity, as if they were swimming rather than flying. Strange appendages writhed from their hulls, reaching out like the tentacles of some cosmic nightmare. What are we looking at, Marcus? Elena asked. Though she already feared the answer, Dr. Chen's hands trembled as he adjusted the sensors. Unknown vessels of clearly alien origin. But, Elena, their biosignatures are unlike anything in our databases. These ships appear to be alive, and they're emanating some kind of psychic energy that's affecting our crew. As if summoned by his words, screams began echoing through the station's communication system. Elena watched in horror as security cameras showed crew members in various sections suddenly collapsing, clutching their heads and writhing in apparent agony. Their faces contorted with expressions of pure terror, as if they were experiencing their worst nightmares made real. The main communications array crackled to life, and a voice spoke in perfect English, though it carried undertones that seemed to bypass the ears and speak directly to the primitive fear centers of the human brain. Creatures of flesh and weakness, the voice hissed with dark amusement. I am Overlord Kithar of the Nethric Empire. Your species has expanded far enough into our hunting grounds. We've come to harvest your fear, to feed upon your terror, and to add your nightmares to our collection. Elena activated the station's emergency broadcast system. This is Commander Vasquez of Aurora 7 to all Earth vessels. We are under attack by hostile alien forces. Repeat, first contact situation has gone critical. Request immediate military assistance. The response came from Captain Rex Morgan aboard the Used Defiance, a heavy cruiser that had been patrolling nearby space lanes. Aurora 7, this is Captain Morgan. We're detecting your distress signal and moving to intercept. Ada, 15 minutes. Hold your position. But 15 minutes felt like an eternity as the Nethrak ships began their assault. Elena watched through the observation windows as the alien vessels extended strange organic tubes toward the station. The tubes attached themselves to Aurora 7's hull with wet, sucking sounds that somehow transmitted through the metal structure itself. They're not trying to destroy us, Dr. Chun observed with growing horror. They're trying to board us. The first Nethrak creature that Elena encountered defied every notion of what alien life might look like. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, with a humanoid shape that had been twisted into something from humanity's darkest nightmares. Its skin was translucent, revealing organs that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Multiple eyes covered its elongated skull, each one focused on Elena with predatory intelligence. But the most disturbing feature was its ability to change shape slightly, shifting its appearance to match whatever would cause the most psychological distress to whoever was looking at it. Your fear tastes exquisite, the creature spoke without moving its mouth, the words appearing directly in Elena's mind. We have consumed the terror of 1,000 species across the galaxy. Each world we visit adds new flavors to our feast. Your species shows particular promise. The creature gestured with one of its 4 arms, and Elena felt her mind being invaded by visions of horror. She saw Earth cities burning, humanity converted into shambling nightmare creatures. children crying as they were transformed into living weapons of fear. But as the visions intensified, something unexpected happened. Instead of breaking down in terror, Alina felt a cold anger building inside her. Dr. Chen had managed to barricade himself in the xenobiology lab, where he was frantically studying the readings from the alien intrusion. Elena, his voice came through a communicator. I'm detecting something incredible. These creatures feed on fear and terror, but there's a limitation in their biology. They can only process certain types of psychological energy. Strong negative emotions like rage, hatred, or cruel determination seem to actually cause them distress. Elena looked at the Nethrek creature that was still trying to flood her mind with terrifying visions. She thought about every injustice she'd ever witnessed, every moment of anger she'd ever suppressed, every dark thought she'd ever pushed away. Instead of fighting the creature's mental intrusion, she began projecting her own thoughts back at it. The alien stumbled backward, its multiple eyes widening in something that looked remarkably like fear. What are you doing? It demanded, its mental voice losing its confident tone. I'm showing you what we keep hidden, Elena replied, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. You think fear is the darkest thing in the human psyche? You have no idea what we're capable of when we stop pretending to be civilized. She projected images of human warfare throughout history, of the calculated cruelty that humans could inflict upon each other, of the cold efficiency with which her species could eliminate threats. She showed the alien what happened when humans stopped being afraid and started being practical about survival. The Nethrek creature began backing away, its form flickering as if it was having difficulty maintaining its shape. This is impossible. Fear is the ultimate weapon. All species break when confronted with their deepest terrors. You made one mistake, Elena said, advancing toward the retreating alien. You assumed that fear was our deepest, darkest emotion. But humans have something much worse than fear. We have the capacity for absolute, remorseless determination to survive. And when we decide that something needs to die, we become very, very good at making that happen. Throughout the station, other crew members were beginning to understand what Alina had discovered. Instead of cowering from the Nethrek invaders, they began fighting back with a cold brutality that surprised even themselves. Dr. Chen had managed to reverse engineer some of the alien biotechnology, creating weapons that turned the creatures' own fear-feeding mechanisms against them. Captain Morgan's ship arrived to find Aurora 7 in a state of controlled chaos. The Nethrek ships were still attached to the station, but something had clearly gone wrong with their invasion. The organic vessels were writhing and pulsing erratically, as if in distress. Aurora 7, this is the Defiance. What's your status? Morgan's voice crackled through the communications. Captain, Elena replied, her voice carrying a new edge that hadn't been there before. We've learned something important about our new neighbors. They're not as tough as they pretend to be. In fact, I think they're about to discover that they picked the wrong species to terrorize. Elena made her way to the station's main communications array, where she could broadcast directly to the Nethrek ships. The alien vessels had begun detaching from Aurora to 7, their organic forms convulsing as if trying to escape from something unpleasant. Overlord Kithara, Elena called out, her voice now carrying the same cold authority that had caused the first Nethrek creature to retreat. This is Commander Elena Vasquez of the human species. I believe you said something about harvesting our fear and feeding on our terror. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. The alien's response came back weak and uncertain, lacking the confident menace of its first communication. Human creature, you have somehow contaminated our feeding process. This is impossible. We are the apex predators of fear itself. No, Elena replied, watching as more human ships began arriving in response to her distress call. You're parasites who have never encountered a host species that enjoys the taste of darkness. You feed on fear, but humans can feed on much worse things. We can thrive on hatred, revenge, and the kind of cold calculation that turns entire species into extinction statistics. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. You wanted to harvest our nightmares, Kithara. But you? Never ask what happens when the nightmares decide to harvest you instead. The Nethrak ships began retreating toward the edge of the system, their organic hulls pulsing with distressed bioluminescence. But Elena knew this was just the beginning. The aliens had revealed their existence, demonstrated their capabilities, and most importantly, shown humanity exactly what kind of threat they represented. Dr. Chung appeared beside her, carrying a datapad filled with biological information about their attackers. Elena, I've analyzed their biosignatures during the retreat. These creatures are definitely afraid of us now, but they're also regrouping. I'm detecting massive fleet movements throughout this sector of space. They're calling for reinforcements. Elena nodded, her mind already working on the implications. Marcus, I want you to compile everything we learned about their biology, their psychology, and their weaknesses. Captain Morgan, she called out over the communications, I need you to establish contact with Earth Command immediately. Tell them we've encountered a species that specializes in psychological warfare, and we're going to need to become very good at it ourselves if we want to survive. As the last of the Nethrak ships disappeared into faster-than-light travel, Elena stared out at the stars with new understanding. Humanity had just received its first taste of galactic warfare, and the lesson was clear. In a universe filled with predators, the species that survived were not necessarily the strongest or the smartest, but the ones willing to become something darker than their enemies. The age of human innocence in the galaxy had ended with the first Nethrak scream of fear. What would emerge from Aurora 7 would be something new, something that even humanity itself might not recognize. But Elena was certain of one thing. When the aliens returned with their reinforcements, they would find that humans had learned to embrace the darkness that lived in every thinking being's heart. The war for humanity's survival was about to begin. And Elena Vasquez had just discovered that the most terrifying weapon in the human arsenal wasn't technology or numbers. It was the willingness to become the monster that monsters feared. The Abyss stares back 6 months after the first contact at Aurora 7. Commander Elena Vasquez stood in a facility that didn't officially exist. Deep beneath the lunar surface, the Shadow Protocol Research Center had become humanity's darkest secret. The sterile corridors hummed with activity as scientists, psychologists, and military specialists worked around the clock to transform the human species into something capable of fighting a war against living nightmares. The psychological conditioning is complete for Team 7, Dr. Marcus Chun reported as he joined Elena in the observation deck. Below them, through reinforced glass, 12 human volunteers sat motionless in meditation chambers. Their brain patterns, displayed on holographic monitors, showed activity that would have been considered pathological just months ago. These humans had learned to embrace and control their capacity for calculated cruelty. Elena studied the readings with mixed feelings. The volunteers, now calling themselves Wraith Teams, had undergone psychological conditioning that stripped away normal human empathy and moral constraints when facing alien threats. They retained their humanity when dealing with fellow humans. But against the Nethrak, they had become something else entirely. How many teams do we have operational? Elena asked. 37 teams of 12 operators each, Dr. Chun replied. Captain Morgan has integrated them into his fleet operations. Early field tests show remarkable results against Nethrak psychological attacks. The wall display lit up with an incoming priority transmission from Earth Command. Admiral Sarachen's face appeared, her expression grim but determined. Commander Vasquez, we're detecting massive Nethrak fleet movements throughout the outer colonies. Intelligence suggests they're planning a coordinated assault on the Sol system within the next 72 hours. Elena felt the familiar cold sensation that had become her constant companion since Aurora 7. Admiral, are we ready to implement Phase 2 of the Shadow Protocol? That's why I'm contacting you directly. The President has authorized full deployment of all Wraith teams and the new bioweapon systems. Elena, what we're about to do, ... There's no going back from this. Elena understood the weight of the Admirals. Words? Phase 2 involved using captured Nethrek biotechnology against the aliens themselves, but in ways that the original creators had never imagined. Human scientists had reverse engineered the fear-feeding mechanisms and turned them into weapons that could broadcast pure psychological terror directly into the Nethrek collective consciousness. Admiral, the Nethrek made their choice when they decided to hunt humanity for sport. We're just responding in kind. 3 days later, Elena found herself aboard the UES Nemesis, a heavily modified dreadnought that served as the flagship for humanity's new psychological warfare fleet. The ship's hull bristled with both conventional weapons and the organic-looking biotransmitters that had been grown from captured Nethrek technology. Captain Rex Morgan met her in the ship's war room, where holographic displays showed the approaching Nethrek armada. Over 300 alien vessels approached Earth, each one pulsing with the familiar bioluminescent patterns that indicated they were preparing their fear-based weapons. Elena, I have to ask, Captain Morgan said, are we sure we want to do this? The psychological profiles on our Wraith teams show they're functioning perfectly, but they're also showing signs of ... permanent change. Elena looked at the tactical display, where red dots representing alien ships outnumbered the blue dots of human vessels by nearly 10-1. Rex, 6 months ago, these creatures tried to turn our research station into a fear-farming facility. They've done it to countless other species across the galaxy. The only reason we survived the first encounter was because we discovered something they didn't expect, that humans can become something darker than their nightmares. The first phase of the battle began when the Nethrek fleet reached the orbit of Mars. True to their established pattern, the aliens began broadcasting waves of psychic terror toward the human defenders. But this time, the human ships were ready. Elena watched from the Nemesis's command bridge as Wraith Team Alpha deployed from their transport vessel. The 12 operators moved through space in modified combat suits that had been infused with biotechnology reverse engineered from captured Nethrek equipment. They could survive in the vacuum of space, their enhanced physiology allowing them to interface directly with alien biosystems. Wraith Alpha, this is Nemesis Command, Elena transmitted. You are authorized to begin psychological infiltration of the lead Nethrek vessels. Remember, your mission is not just to disable their ships, but to introduce concepts into their collective consciousness that will spread throughout their entire fleet. The response came from team leader Sarah Kane, whose voice carried the flat, emotionless tone that marked all successful Wraith operatives. Understood, Command. Beginning infiltration sequence. We will introduce the concept of individual mortality and personal helplessness into their bioneural networks. Elena watched as the 12 operators approached the massive Nethrek flagship. Instead of trying to fight their way aboard, they used the aliens' own biotechnology to merge temporarily with the ship's living hull. The Wraith teams had learned to mimic the psychological signatures of the Nethrek themselves, allowing them to infiltrate alien vessels. Undetected. What happened next would have been impossible to predict from humanity's pre-contact psychology. The Wraith operatives began broadcasting specific psychological constructs directly into the Nethrek ship's living nervous system. But these weren't human fears or terrors. They were concepts that the Nethrek species had never developed the capacity to process. ****. The first construct was individual identity. The Nethrek had evolved as a collective consciousness, with individual aliens serving as specialized organs in a larger biological entity. The Wraith teams introduced the terrifying concept of personal separation, of being alone inside one's own mind without the comforting presence of the collective. The second construct was existential meaninglessness, where the Nethrek found purpose in their role as galactic predators. The humans introduced doubt about the significance of their existence. Questions about whether their actions had any ultimate meaning in an indifferent universe. The third and most devastating construct was the inevitability of personal death. Not just the death of the body, but the complete cessation of individual consciousness. The absolute end of personal experience and awareness. Elena watched in fascination as the effects spread throughout the Nethrak fleet. The organic ships began convulsing, their bioluminescent patterns flickering erratically, as the alien crews experienced psychological concepts they had no evolutionary defense against. Nemesis Command, this is Wraith Alpha. Sarah Kane's voice remained steady, despite the chaos surrounding her. Psychological infiltration successful. The target vessels are experiencing cascade failures in their collective consciousness networks. Recommend immediate deployment of Phase 2 bioweapons while their mental defenses are compromised. Elena gave the order that would forever change humanity's place in the galaxy. All ship deploy biotransmitters. Begin broadcasting Protocol Omega. Throughout the human fleet, the captured and modified Nethrak biotechnology activated. But instead of broadcasting fear, the human weapons transmitted something far more dangerous, the philosophical and psychological concepts that formed the foundation of human civilization's darkest periods. The Nethrak ships were suddenly flooded with broadcasts of human warfare, human cruelty, human efficiency, and the art of systematic destruction. But more than just images, the transmissions carried the underlying psychological frameworks that allowed humans to commit acts of calculated brutality while maintaining their sanity. Elena heard Overlord Kithra's voice over the communications. Array, but now it carried tones of panic and confusion that had never been present before. Human creatures, what have you done to us? Our collective consciousness is fragmenting. We cannot maintain unity of thought. You wanted to harvest our nightmares, Kithara, Elena replied, her voice carrying the same cold authority that had marked their first encounter. But you never understood that human nightmares aren't just about fear. They're about what we become when we decide that something needs to stop existing. The battle that followed wasn't really a battle in any conventional sense. The Nethrak ships, paralyzed by psychological concepts they couldn't process, became sitting targets for human weapons. But Elena and her commanders made a deliberate choice. They didn't destroy the alien vessels. Instead, they disabled them and began boarding operations. Elena led the boarding party that entered Kithra's flagship. The interior of the ship was a writhing mass of organic corridors and chambers, all pulsing with distressed bioluminescence. The Nethrak crew members they encountered were in various states of psychological breakdown, their collective consciousness fractured by the human psychological attacks. Elena found Overlord Kithara in what appeared to be the ship's command center, a chamber lined with organic interfaces that connected the alien commander directly to the vessel's living nervous system. The creature that had once projected such confident menace now huddled in a corner, its multiple eyes darting around in apparent terror. You have destroyed us, Kithara whispered, its mental voice weak and fragmented. Our collective consciousness has been shattered. We are experiencing individual awareness. The isolation is unbearable. Elena knelt down to face the alien leader directly. Kithara, you came to our system to harvest fear and turn our people into living weapons. You've done this to countless species across the galaxy. Now you're discovering what it feels like to be on the receiving end. The alien swarm flickered. As it struggled to maintain coherence, we did not know. We thought fear was the ultimate weapon. We never encountered a species that could weaponize concepts we cannot comprehend. Here's what's going to happen, Elena continued, her voice carrying the flat, emotionless tone of a Wraith operative. You're going to return to your home territory and spread word throughout the Nethrak Empire. Humanity is now off limits. Any alien species that attempts to harvest or enslave humans will discover that we have weaponized concepts that most civilizations don't even have words for. Elena paused, making sure the alien understood every word. You feed on fear, Kithara. But humans have learned to feed on the kind of absolute certainty that turns entire civilizations into cautionary tales. We call it determination, and it's much more dangerous than any nightmare. Over the following hours, Elena and her teams systematically processed the entire Nethrak fleet. The aliens were not killed or physically harmed. That would have been too simple. Instead, they were psychologically conditioned with concepts that would make it impossible for them to function as predators ever again. Each Nethrak crew member was exposed to carefully crafted psychological constructs designed to create permanent changes in their species' collective consciousness. They were introduced to empathy, to individual moral responsibility, to the concept that their actions had consequences that extended beyond their immediate survival needs. Dr. Marcus Chain monitored the process from the Nemesis, watching his bioreadings. The alien ship showed fundamental changes in their neural structures. Elena, the psychological conditioning appears to be permanent. The Nethrak collective consciousness is reforming, but with completely different parameters. They're developing individual identity and moral constraints. Elena nodded with satisfaction. Good. A species that learns to see other beings as individuals rather than resources is a species that can be negotiated with. The remnants of the Nethrak fleet departed the Sol system 3 days later, but they carried with them something that would transform their entire civilization. The concepts that the Wraith teams had introduced into their collective consciousness began spreading throughout the Nethrak Empire, creating the first individualists in a species that had been purely collective for millions of years. 6 months later, Elena stood once again in the observation deck of Aurora 7, now rebuilt and serving as humanity's primary xenological research facility. The station had become a symbol of humanity's transformation from a peaceful, research-oriented species to something much more dangerous. Dr. Chun joined her, carrying reports from across human space. The psychological conditioning programs are being implemented throughout the colonial fleet. We now have over 200 Wraith teams operational, with more volunteers joining every week. Elena studied the reports with mixed feelings. The volunteers, who underwent the psychological conditioning, retained their humanity when dealing with other humans. But they had fundamentally changed in their approach to alien threats. They were efficient, ruthless, and completely without mercy when facing species that threatened human survival. Marcus, do you ever wonder if we've gone too far? Elena asked quietly. Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment before responding. Elena, 3 months ago we received intelligence reports about 17 other species that the Nethrak had completely enslaved. Entire civilizations turned into fear-farming operations. If we hadn't learned to become something darker than their nightmares, that would have been Earth's fate. Elena nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that humanity had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The Wraith teams were heroes who had saved their species, but they were also something that the old humanity wouldn't have recognized as human. A communication alert chimed, and Admiral Chun's face appeared on the wall display. Commander Vasquez, we're receiving diplomatic overtures from several alien civilizations. Word has spread throughout this sector of the galaxy about humanity's victory over the Nethrak Empire. Some species are requesting alliance discussions, while others are offering tribute in exchange for non-aggression pacts. Elena smiled, though the expression carried none of the warmth it once had. Admiral, schedule the diplomatic meetings. But make sure our guests understand the terms. Any species that approaches humanity with peaceful intentions will find us to be valuable allies. Any species that sees us as potential, prey will discover that we've learned to embrace concepts that most civilizations don't survive encountering. As the transmission ended, Elena stared out at the stars with new understanding. Humanity had indeed answered the darkness with something even darker. The question that remained was whether the species that emerged from this transformation would still be recognizably human, or if they had become something else entirely, something that even the monsters learned to fear. The war with the Nethrak was over, but Elena knew that humanity's transformation was just beginning. In learning to weaponize their own psychological darkness, they had discovered capabilities that would make them either the galaxy's greatest protectors or its most dangerous predators. The choice of which path to follow would define the future of human civilization among the stars. Asterisk, asterisk.